Game design has a reputation for being a boring and lonely activity. Probably. But it doesn't have to be this way. Making them with other people is an exciting, bonding experience that almost always ends in disaster. Much like a relationship, I don't think a game development team works if the designers aren't on an equal ability and similar mindset. Imagine being passionate about a project, only to have another developer criticise your efforts because it's not as they envisioned, or if they have a patronising tone to the things that they say. It just wouldn't work. Unfortunately, I've never been in that situation. Well, not on the receiving end at least. I'm incredibly privileged to know Tommyttk. In primary school, we made paper games together until the teachers shut our racket down. In secondary school, we made proper games. Mostly alone, but occasionally we collaborated on joint projects that always seemed to contain lots of old men with beards. There have never been arguments between us. I like to think that it's because we're both reasonable game developers who can trust the other to do a good job, even if the result isn't what we would have done. The first project we worked on was Christmas Combat, which we made when we were 12. It's already been covered in a previous episode, so I'll be brief. It could be difficult to share the development of a game since one can't directly work on it when the other is, but we took in turn to work on it. I worked on the background art. Tom drew the characters, and we shared the coding, though I insisted on doing the AI, which turned out to be rubbish. I don't think we won the competition, but as a project it was a success that we remember fondly. It wasn't until college that we embarked on the next game together. Since I have no recollection of how it came about, I guess it must have been Tom who saw the 2007 Daily Click Christmas competition and chose to work on an entry with me. We made an RPG called Santasatnas, splitting the project in two, with him working on the world map and myself on the battle screen. That way we were free to work on it as we pleased, without worrying about conflicting with what the other person was doing. I spent days making a battle intro, made of 2D elements, but made to look 3D as it spun about and showed the characters about to engage in battle. I remember at the time getting bored of the sequence every time I playtested the battles. I mean, I would have made them skippable were it not for their darker purpose. For behind the scenes, the battle screen was taking shape, one pixel at a time to form yet another 3D effect, once again using nifty maths. The battles themselves were slow-paced, turn-based affairs. Once it was your turn to attack, the battle menus would pop out from the side of the screen, letting you choose an option. If you're interested in making an RPG system, this will be one of the challenges you face. How do you make a system that displays attacks one at a time, in the order that they're chosen? I made it so that it would create an invisible object that would float down the side of the screen, stacking on top of existing commands ahead of it in the battle queue, with the game working through the animations and commands for each one by one. Much like my old bouncy ball AI, it's an amateurish method, but it made it easy for me since my mind could grasp the concept of physical objects in a queue. And more importantly, it worked flawlessly every time. I'd probably use the same system to make a game now. I also loved pixel shaders at the time and invented a way of making sparkling ice and water, which Tom then elaborated on for this project. And many more afterwards. In college, we'd excitedly talk about the things we were adding, and it wasn't until near the end of the project that we actually got to see what the other had been working on. I remember leaving out the side door one day, laughing hysterically as Tommyttk told me about Jimmy. But before you can understand the significance of this character, you need to know about the running jokes we had as teenagers. We would moan about games that used NPCs to artificially block the player's path. At the time, we relentlessly mocked a game called Black Mirror for having terrible voice acting and a pedo lead character who offered children sweets in order to get them to talk to him. Oh, and we loved the word defenestration. And poor little Jimmy bore the brunt of all that. The world map was too small, so he used Jimmy to artificially extend the length of the game. Not just by casually blocking the bridge, but by going out of his way to ensure that you couldn't cross. Firstly, he does this by running around to block you. Later on, you come back and the bridge is completely destroyed, with Jimmy stood innocently next to it. So you go away again to find some wood to rebuild it, and when Jimmy's purpose is finally spent, he gets wrecked by a window that serves no purpose other than to kill him and to use an attack called defenestration to fuel a running joke that we had at the time. The game was full of things like that. Casper knows way too much about windows and boats, only to be rudely put down by an angry and heartless Santa who Tom ensured interrupted other characters in the game and got their genders confused every time.
Lady, I don't suppose that... Oh God, who the hell are you?
The very storyline is like something out of Monty Python, with a mysterious Atlas making Greenland green. I won't spoil the end for you, but it's satisfyingly anticlimactic. We got friends and family to narrate different people. Tom's brother did the best job. Here, let me stop talking so you can admire the fantastic voice quality.
Certain peril.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't risk damage to this antique boat.
There's absolutely no chance you may borrow it.
We'll be careful.
Okay then, but be a quick lad.
The night before the deadline, I was chosen to voice Santa with a fake northern accent. I think I had a cold at the time and I was new to recording my voice. It was a scary experience for me. Don't judge me too badly. You can laugh at my incredibly forced and fake accent at the end of the game all you like though, since I did that recently. We also liked the film 300 at the time and added a secret island where you got to fight against a naked Philip who had an attack called Spartan Infection. Nasty stuff. Nobody else seems to get the humour in this game, which I think is a shame since the campaign is this game's saving grace. I guess that's the problem when you make it with so many personal references. But still, the game had bigger problems to worry about. If you've learned anything from this series, it's hopefully that playtesting is important, and there wasn't any for this project. The battle screen and world map were tested as separate entities, much like how I suspect the Total War series is made. Santasatnas was a game of two halves, smushed together at the last second before the crunch time and released. It could have been terrible. Minutes before submitting it, I remember playing it and thinking that it took too long to get anywhere, so I doubled Santa's running speed and halved the probability of battles. And it's just as well, because even with that, the game's pacing is too slow. What were we thinking? Ideally, we should have got the two halves done with a week to spare and then spent the remaining time endlessly playing through and balancing things. That time doesn't just make a small difference, it can completely change the game. I couldn't bring myself to play it until weeks after the deadline. When I did, I was actually pleasantly surprised. The enemy scaled pretty well, though there was a huge leap in difficulty about halfway through, and I had to specifically fight the easier of the two randomly spawned enemies on the snowy island since the other was as hard as bulls. But for some reason, this made the game better. Neither of us had any idea that the gameplay that truly mattered was how the two halves interacted with each other. Suddenly, I found myself saving for a more powerful sword or item or armour. Some things were hugely overpowered. Other things, useless. It was only through fascinating trial and error that I discovered these things. Despite having worked on it for a month, playing it in its finished state was like a completely new game. But there were bugs. The retreat option didn't do anything. Melee attacks scaled far better than the ranged and magic attacks. Eventually your health got so high you were like a god. The physics on Santa's bobble hat would go crazy, bouncing across the screen. I think that was one of the first things I worked on. Great to know I had my priorities right. Although the elf is referred to as Casper, he never actually introduced himself and is just known as Helper in most of the game files. Oh, and the end battle wouldn't load, and you just stand there, staring at Atnas forever. Not that it mattered, since nobody got that far anyway. I don't think that Tom bothered playing through the game in its entirety, and the judges of the competition, incredibly, rewarded it second place. Which probably says more about the competition than anything else. I don't think we listened to any of the advice they gave us. The game also ran incredibly slowly. Not for us, since we had decent dual-core PCs. But it seems as though the average person in 2008 was using a Pentium PC with an extreme graphics CPU and a 40MB RAM hard drive. Or something. Fortunately, this version can no longer be played by anybody since it really was an embarrassment. The following year, I dedicated a few days to fixing the project and re-released it, mainly to hide the old broken game from public view. It worked a lot better and had all kinds of useful tweaks, like showing how much damage you were inflicting and how hurt the enemy was. This stuff only becomes apparent once you're playing the game properly and in a finished state. Oh yes, and this version could actually be completed. What can I say? Lessons were learned from Santasatnas, which remains one of the most advanced games that I've ever completed, and the game that I've probably learned the most from. RPGs are a genre that's surprisingly easy to make, but devilishly difficult to master. They have a lot of replayability, and even a simple one can have rewarding gameplay as long as you set yourself larger goals than simply killing the next monster. But if you plan to make one, put aside a lot of time for playtesting the game through in its entirety. And I mean a lot. If you do it right, you'll be sick of playing it by the end. And very few people will give it a fair chance, since it's a genre that features a steep learning curve and requires an investment from those who intend to get enjoyment out of it. And Santasatnas probably hasn't helped the genre's reputation.
Ha ha ha! Greetings, Santa. Do you know who I am yet?
Your mum?
Precisely. Wait, no. What are you talking about? I am your brother!
No, that's impossible. I only have one brother and oh, wait. That's you, isn't it?
Atnas, why are you making Greenland green? Stop this madness!
Oh, I just wanted it to live up to its name, that's all. I mean, brought this up at the council last week, but they were just going on about tradition this and tradition that. Then I suggested You should at least change the name to White Land or...
Shut up! That's completely unacceptable. Prepare to die!